Hey everyone, welcome to Bombin the AM with Scoops and the Wolf. Except that the Wolf is gone. He was called away to jury duty, and then jury duty was canceled, and then he went to the CBS New York office, or I guess Beast, as we're calling it now. But he could not find anywhere to sit down and be quiet. So that was just my convenient way of being able to get Alex off the show completely. I was able to just circumvent doing it accidentally and having to come up with excuses. He just couldn't find anywhere to go. So I was able to bring on Polygon's Danielle Riendeau. I got it right this time, didn't I?
You did. That was awesome.
Yes.
Yes.
Riendeau. I don't know why I said Riendeau. I don't know. I guess I just looked at it as kind of a snapshot glance. And
Mess
that's
of vowels. You know, there's so many vowels in there that I don't blame you at all. We used to get reindeer all the time, like when telemarketers would call my house.
reindeer.
Like,
Okay, because that was going to be
Mr.
my
Reindeer there?
that was going to be my follow-up question. That if that's how I butchered your name, then I obviously you sound like you have a last name that probably gets butchered a lot.
It does. Yeah. Again, the vowels trip people up all the time, but it's cool. It happens. I guess Klepek probably it doesn't happen quite as often. Maybe.
Klepek is pretty
Klepek.
common. Cowpack I got once.
Cowpack.
By someone, some telemarketer. I mostly at that point wanted to just have a conversation with them of, like, wow, like walk me through
How'd
your
you get
process.
there?
Where did you get the O? Like, there's no
Yeah.
there's no umlaut or anything on there that might make you think, oh, this has to be pronounced fancy. Like, but I don't know. I guess to be sympathetic to
Yeah.
telemarketers as much as one can be, then they have to say a lot of names every day. I don't know.
I
but
wonder
you-
if they got some fun out of what can I do with this name? Like where can I go with this? Or maybe they were like looking to get fired and they were just trying to go for like what offensive thing can I say here
Yeah,
to this
you know what? That's actually would be ingenious if their
Yeah.
way of having fun with their lives in a obviously crappy job, as annoying as it
Yeah.
is to the rest of us, is I'm going to butcher these names in a creative way that
Yeah.
might annoy these people and get me off the line with them, but wouldn't necessarily if
Get
a
you
manager
fired.
was to listen to the conversation. They may not go, oh, well, you were being a jerk to the potential customer. That's genius.
Yeah. Yeah.
Genius.
I
If
mean,
anyone in this,
we've
if
all got to
anyone
do what
wa-
we got to do.
if anyone watching this
Make our
is a
jobs
telemarketer,
easy.
please just take this advice and run with it and let us know how it goes. Or if you worked in telemarketing and you have some experience with how to pronounce people's names or not pronounce them, as the case may be, that sounds pretty great.
Yeah. I think that's
I actually,
that's where I
actually,
gotta go with it.
here's a good one. So I separately do a Lost rewatch podcast, and one
Oh,
of the
awesome.
guests that we had on recently mentioned to me, "Hey Patrick, I've only known you over the internet. I've never actually had to confront the reality of understanding how to pronounce your name. Like I guess they've just kind of seen it from a distance, never really processed Klepek, but in their mind, and they just doubled down on this, was that my name was actually Patrick Clipclop. Because to them that was
Wow.
much funnier, and I agree with them.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, like, I guess if I was Danielle Reindeer, it would be funnier. It would be really easy to remember. There's
Patrick
always that.
Clipclop is a fantastic name. Like,
Yeah, it's pretty good.
at this point, it's one of those nicknames that sometimes when you get it, you just kind of got to run with it. So,
Yeah.
Patrick Clipclop is something I'm kind of okay with. But
Yeah, I kind of dig that. I like that. It's
in
pretty good.
any case, I don't know. I guess people tune into this because occasionally they think about video games or talk about video games. I don't know. That seems like an odd reason to watch two people talking to each other about video games on a Monday morning. But
Yeah, right?
I guess.
Video
So
games.
in addition to writing over at Polygon, you are also one of the excellent new co-hosts of Idle Thumbs, which
Oh, thank you.
if people do not listen to that podcast, they should. It's the one I listen to when I want to pick up on smart things to say about video games because I am capable of doing that.
That's what I used to do, and then I started co-hosting, and now I'm just like, well, I need a new source, so
Yeah, you took it to its logical conclusion of just then co-opting the podcast. I really
basically.
like that.
Hostile takeovers, it's sort of what you do, the feminist gaming Illuminati members, we're all
You can't say that out loud. You can't say
that's
that
right.
out loud.
Sorry. Feminist cabal. Secret handshake. Gotta do what you gotta do.
So did you play any games over the weekend?
Yes. Well, Let's see. I was at GaymerX this weekend, so
Right,
I
that
played.
was this weekend. I
It was this
unfortunately could
weekend.
not make it myself. It seemed a little odd to fly out from Chicago from a San Francisco-based site, but we had some of our other guys, our new hires, Dan Reichert and
That's right.
Jason, were wandering around, hanging out. So give
I
us.
met them actually. It was
Oh, did you
pretty
really?
exciting stuff. Yes, yes. There was a meeting of Polygon and Giant Bomb there. It was very exciting.
I didn't know that was. They finally must have passed the resolution that allows competing outlets to talk to one another.
Yeah, right. I mean, it happens on occasion, but
How was
apparently I'm doing it
GaymerX?
right now. It was wonderful. It was absolutely fantastic. So, it's 4 days of just the most welcoming, sort of accepting, warm, happy, rainbow splashed atmosphere in the universe, which is great and wonderful. There's a lot of programming. There's a lot of good stuff about inclusivity in games, and writing queer characters and hiring queer people to make games, so on and so forth. It very much feels like GDC for this is an alphabet thing, but GDC for LGBT, thing, which is wonderful. I enjoy it very much. So. Met some wonderful people, met a lot of people that I sort of talk to on Twitter, which is always the best thing in the world. When you meet real people who actually care about your work and enjoy your writing. So it's very, very exciting for me.
So this was the second GaymerX. There was one last year. This
Yes.
one was a bigger deal because that's a video game companies actually got involved, which was really exciting
Yeah.
to see. Although it is my understanding that this is it still the last one, or are they trying to figure out something for next year now that the response was so big?
I don't know what the official line is because I haven't talked to the organizers yet, and I'm good friends with the organizers, so it's
Sure.
it's not like I don't know what they're thinking. I think they're probably going to regroup and see what's up. Basically, the sort of the story before this happened was this is going to be the last Gamer X. It's growing rapidly and it's very hard because it's a very small group of people who puts it on and it's a ton of work and everything. So, I do wonder if it's the last one. I really hope it's not the last one. So I guess we'll see. Stay tuned, fingers crossed, so on and so forth.
Well,
But it really would be
it's
a shame if it were the last one, I think,
it,
because it really is a really, for me, I live in San Francisco. It's not, something I necessarily need in my daily life. But, for someone who's maybe closeted or they don't feel comfortable in E3 or GDC or a space like that, I think it's really, really important for folks who kind of need that space. So.
yeah, and it's not it was easy to be sympathetic to when they were talking about the difficulties of running a convention like this because it's a small crowd in a city that you would have to travel to, sort of
Sure.
and not getting the money to run something like that is really difficult. Like when you have a small group of people, even if this
Yeah.
is very vital or it's looked at from the outside as being, man, it's so great that stuff like this exists because hopefully it inspires other events to exist so that more
Yeah.
people can see and attend things like this. But there needs to be structural support. There needs to be the 2Ks and the EAs of the world going, hey, if you want to see more of this, then you got to put your money where your mouth is and support the existence of stuff like this because crowdfunding is one thing. It can get ideas going places. It can encourage people to want to see it through, but it's not sustainable. Like that's not how
Yeah.
you can't do that every single year because just naturally people are going to grow tired of it. So it got me really excited and hopeful that because there seemed to be some corporate interest this year that maybe there is something here that can gain some momentum. If it's not GaymerX, maybe it's some other folks thinking about, okay, well, what worked here? Where can this work better? Because obviously, I think the response, just looking on Twitter this weekend, was like something like this has to exist. This is too good of a thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It was really, really heartening to see. Ubisoft had a presence there, Gearbox did, BioWare did, so by extension, EA did. So that was really, really great to see, and not necessarily something you always see. You go to Pride or something like that, like Gay Pride, and you definitely see corporations, but you don't always see like tech corporations. I mean, you're
Yeah.
certainly starting to a little bit, but it's nice to see like, okay, there's some big guys here too. That's always comforting for the future, I guess. So.
I don't know, but it also, especially as we see, lots and lots of folks that are spinning off, doing independent development. Like it is, if these bigger companies want to continue to attract the most talent, they have to be able to, just from a sort of talent retention perspective, like be appealing places to work. And so, well, there's a little bit of kind of like, oh, it's the photo op opportunity. It's like, well,
Sure.
even if that's true, like it means that things like this get to exist. Like everyone kind of gets a little bit of what they want in the process, even if there's a little bit of a wink, wink, nod, nod for why it's happening in the first place. Not to say that every company showing up to these is disingenuous, but there are there's benefits for everyone involved by having events like this go on.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why I always love to see sort of the business case scenario. It's like if you're not appealing to someone's empathy, appeal to their wallet. Doing the right thing comes in many forms. So I'm very encouraged by that sort of thing.
I mean, that's why I thought it was interesting at GDC this year at the Animal Crossing panel, in which Nintendo, a company that only just recently found itself in hot water over Tomodachi Life, and is it or isn't a political statement to not include certain types of people as a sort of option in the game. They made the argument that for Animal Crossing, the reason that the most recent 3DS one was the most successful game they've had yet was because of diversity. And they said if we had the exact same people making the exact same game for the 7th time, and they were all the same, Japanese white guys. Essentially, they didn't say that, but was sort of the subtext.
Sure. Yeah.
The game wouldn't have been as successful because they wouldn't have had as many good ideas. And it was like, okay, there's Nintendo, a company that doesn't ever want to talk about things like this, talking about it in a very corporate-minded way, but it is probably one that appeals to other people that maybe work for big corporations and are looking for ways to want to justify doing things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. The business case for equality,
Yeah, it's a little crass to think of it that way, but I guess you try and find the arguments that can land on the widest amount of ears.
Absolutely. I'm all for it. If it benefits people, if it means we get more equality, we get more good ideas, we get more people from diverse backgrounds making games, then I'm all for it. So, yeah, rad.
was there a particular highlight of GaymerX?
The highlight for me is always just meeting people and just encountering people and having fun and feeling, really super comfortable. It's something I'm actually sort of writing about right now, potentially for Polygon, but it sort of struck me how this is the only conference, and I date someone who's in the industry. It was the only conference where I really felt totally comfortable, just sort of like holding her hand and like just being totally like happy and comfortable, like just going to panels and seeing people and just seeing like, folks dressed in gender-bending cosplay, that sort of thing. Like for me, that's really such a highlight because you very rarely see that going to a conference. I might see that in my life living in San Francisco, but that's not something you see at like a game conference. So that's definitely a highlight for me. And if I had a programming highlight, it would probably be there was a panel called Interneting While Female. And it had Anita Sarkeesian and Carolyn Pettit from GameSpot and Catherine Cross.
That sounds potentially really interesting because the two of them have have seen it all in terms of what the internet has to offer.
And they really have. They really, really have. And actually, there was a co-host, Catherine Cross, I believe, who's also a writer, and she's a sociologist who studies internet gang behavior, basically, sort of like abuse and harassment and so on and so forth. And it was a really incredible panel. Folks were getting very emotional in the panel, not the panelists themselves, but just people in the crowd. And I feel like I was looking at Twitter while I was sort of hearing about it, and people were getting very emotional because it was very much talking about sort of abuse that women will get online and harassment that women will get online just for sort of having like being a woman having an opinion about a video game on the internet, basically, how dare.
Right.
So, it was tough to hear a lot of things, but it was also very uplifting because the message overall of the panel was, build community and build support networks and, just don't let it get to you, don't let it sort of silence you, be a woman with an opinion on the internet, be a person with opinions on the internet. And there were tips for allies too, for men who want to actually care about these issues and want to be involved. And Anita actually said something like, what, if you're being called a white knight, you're probably doing something right. You're probably speaking to a good, message. So
That's always been my perspective. Is like if
yeah,
you're drawing out those shitty corners of the internet, then yeah, maybe you should just keep doing what you're doing.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that was actually very hopeful. It was difficult but very hopeful, and probably the programming highlight for me. So
Well, that's certainly interesting. I mean, I'm not surprised that there was such a response in the audience in particular because I found similar things when you speak. Obviously my situation is radically different, and the feedback and stuff that gets hurled my way is obviously different and probably muted to a great extent. But nonetheless, a lot what ends up happening as a result of when people get that sort of bile from the internet online is they tend to not want to talk about it because they just want to run away with it, which is a completely natural reaction to not want to engage, to not want to look at it, to just block all of it and move on, like all completely rational responses to things like that happening. But it also leads to people not talking about it. And then when you don't talk about it, it's in one way, it gives the people that did this in the first place a victory because now these people aren't talking, they're silenced. And it also doesn't allow other people to recognize and realize that this is happening because when you can talk about those situations that you've been in, it makes, it's not great that everyone can feel like collectively like they've all been abused by crazy people on the internet, but it does make you feel better that you're not the only one and you shouldn't feel bad for feeling bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really the main thrust. Like, build a community, know other people that this happens to, and talk to them. Like, that is just the most crucial thing when that sort of thing happens to you. And, it's something I've experienced to some degree, much, much lesser degree than anybody that was on that panel. But, it definitely happens. And it definitely happens in weird, strange ways. And it can be kind of baffling, I used to work for the ACLU, and sort of I got used to internet hate and even hate in person. I've been spit on at protests and things like that before. Jeez. So I had kind of good training going into this world of writing about video games. But
yeah, it's always, like, come on, video game communities. Whatever you can get at me is nothing compared to what I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny to me because that was always about, an issue that people hold really, really strongly in their hearts, gun control or free speech or something like that. And then I kind of got into this world and I was like, well, these are the same messages about wanting me to die and get painful cancer, but this is about I thought something was bad in a video game. So
they all have anime avatars.
Yeah, like what's up with that, right?
I don't know what's up with that because I got nothing against anime. I don't know. I just see a trend. When it gets real bad, I just notice lots of anime avatars. I don't get it. I don't know. I don't understand why, but it happens.
There's a correlation somewhere along the line. Something happened.
So yeah, something went wrong along the way. The anime took some weird split that someone needs to do a history of, and we'll finally figure that out where that all went wrong.
Get a sociologist on it.
Because I love Cowboy Bebop. And that's why I have to consider Cowboy Bebop not anime, because then it just drags me into this whole conversation of I love anime, and it's like I don't know if I'm willing to go there.
I know you're hiding your Cowboy Bebop avatar right now. You're like, oh, no, that's not anime. It's
not, yeah.
Clearly, it's just an animated show.
I like someone in the chat. NotAllAnimeAvatars.com. That's a good site. You should start that.
Exactly.
I like that. Or that actually would be a good hashtag. That would be a good one.
Not all men, not all anime avatars.
Exactly, that's fair.
Put them together.
I don't know. You should put all those people in a room. I don't know. Maybe that's not.
What would happen?
See, that's why we need our drone. This is why this drone we were talking about off camera before we started. If we had our drone that we could also monitor. So now we've got two use cases that I can tell CBS. One,
seriously,
we need a drone to find Alex Navarro running around the CBS New York office looking for a quiet room because he can't find one right now. And then two, when we put not all men and the not all anime avatars people in a room together, how else are we supposed to monitor it? Like, we need an expensive drone.
Seriously, I mean, and you can't put a person in that room that's going to be against some kind of OSHA rule. You don't know what's going to happen in there, so clearly you got to send a robot to do a human's work in that one.
Gosh, yeah. That's a really true point. So it sounds like GaymerX was a big success. Really hope that that leads to them finding a way to do that next year, because it seems like they really, it happened last year, but it seemed like this year was their first real. It felt like a real convention. Like they really kind of stepped it up, and it seemed like there was a lot of structural support. So it'd be awesome to see if they can get one step further and do like streaming for people that can't be there and all this great stuff. So I'm gonna cross my fingers that they manage to figure that out for next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. Fingers are crossed. And, if anybody watching, has tons of money and really wants to support a great thing, I mean, there you go.
There you go. Yeah. Okay, rich people in the Giant Bomb chat, think about
That's
it.
Right.
Think
That's
about
right,
it.
rich people.
So we were talking about this a little bit off camera about the fact that I try and play games in my free time, but I don't get a lot of time to play them during the day. I don't know. Playing video games when the sun is out, I don't really know. I don't know what that is, but you actually get to review games. You get to play games over at this website, Polygon. Have you played anything recently that has really caught your attention? What have you been reviewing lately?
Yeah. Well, the game I'm reviewing, I can't say too much about it because of embargo stuff. But I can say that I am reviewing Abyss Odyssey, which is a new game from the developers of Xenoclash.
Ace Studio,
Ace Team.
Right? Ace
Yeah.
Team.
They're a Chilean developer, and they always have a really interesting, colorful, sort of zany aesthetic in all the games they make.
They're crazy. They're three brothers, right? If I remember correctly.
I think so. Yeah.
They're three brothers that make games together. I think they made the original Xenoclash largely by themselves, and then when they made Xenoclash 2, they had that game was a much bigger game.
Sure.
Than the original Xenoclash. You had kind of a not quite open world, but you had a lot of options in terms of what you could do in that game. And they did 6 and expanded, and they have kind of like a proper studio. And Atlas has gotten really involved with them, which I think is great because Ace Team makes the weirdest shit. I love the Xenoclash games so much. They have deep, profound flaws all over them, but they're just so strange. Like the commitment to first-person fist brawling is fantastic.
Yeah, went all the way in that game. It was pretty great. They also made Rock of Ages. I don't know if you remember that, but it was sort of like a hybrid tower defense, maze, ball rolling. I feel like there were other genres in there too, but I don't even remember sort of quite how they worked. And it was sort of like they did levels based on art style. There were sort of like Grecian urn styled levels, and then there were sort of like Art Nouveau styled levels, and it was just very like, wow, that's cool. So they always kind of make games that are very colorful, very, very interesting visually, and they're always sort of mashups of different genres. And Abyss Odyssey is almost sort of like Spelunky-like game with randomly generated platforming levels. But the gameplay itself is much more brawler RPG fighting game sort of mashup. So it's almost as if you're going through these randomly generated levels, you're beating things up, you're leveling up, and the creatures that you're fighting are all sort of different mythological creatures. There's centaurs, and there's Ents, and there are all these weird things that you have to kill. So I'm really enjoying it. I can't say too much about it or give too much of an opinion about it, but it's pretty cool. That's all I can say. And I have played a game that's a much smaller game, just sort of like a free game on the web, and it was appropriate for this weekend because it was called Coming Out Simulator 2014.
I saw some people talking about that on Twitter, but I haven't had a chance to check it out myself.
Yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. It'll only take about 10 minutes to play through, and it's a single-person developer called Nikki Case, and they basically made a game about their coming out story. And you play as them, from when they were about, I think, 17 or 16. Sort of like, they have their first boyfriend, and you're sort of basically just making dialogue options. You're just sort of choosing sort of what does Nikki say in this situation? And the story doesn't change too radically throughout. I spoke with them actually this weekend, and they were telling me about how, they wanted the idea of there's some player choice. You can sort of choose the flavor of the story, but the story itself is never going to change too radically because it's a personal story, and it speaks very much to the heart, which I thought was a very cool thing. That's a very cool way of incorporating player choice, but also still kind of telling your story. And it was very, heartwarming and heartbreaking and all of the things. And I was playing it and sort of like going back to when I was 17 and, sort of dealing with some of these things. So it was very much a game that speaks to sort of personal gaming and sort of personal storytelling in games.
And I love that the title sort of lures you in a way, because obviously, it's touching on an especially sensitive topic and eventually a very personal topic for a lot of folks that went through that themselves. But the title itself, is kind of like, all right, come on, like, okay, like I really like the way that it sort of kind of tickles you about what they're about to get into, and sort of like lowers your guard before obviously it ends up going to some pretty personal territory.
Going for the gut punch, yeah, and it's a little bit of a joke, making fun of all the goat simulator and truck driving simulators, and
there's a simulator for everything at this point, I think.
Yeah, exactly, which is pretty cool. And the game itself is actually, even though it's very, very sensitive subject matter, it's done with a lot of humor. It's very, very tongue in cheek, and Nikki is sort of a funny person, and I don't know. I would definitely recommend it, even if it's not necessarily in your wheelhouse, that sort of thing. If you're just interested in personal storytelling in games, and to any degree, I would recommend checking it out for sure.
It's definitely interesting, and I've noticed this with a couple of games I've played recently, in which games, I think in general, are often or have been pretty bad at switching tones. In the way that sometimes books and movies are capable of doing. Often games kind of pick one side or the other. They're going to be deathly serious, or they're going to be funny, or or whatever tone they choose to adopt. But like switching between those at will is just not something that most games do. But Wolfenstein is one recently that
absolutely
is tonally all over the place. It's probably the closest touchstone, because it was a big inspiration for that game, was Inglourious Bastards. Where Wolfenstein is talking about extremely serious subjects about the Nazi regime in World War II, while at the same time, like, you're a crazy badass that is shooting up hundreds of enemies, and somehow
robot dogs.
Yeah. I heard that on Idle Thumbs. I also agree with stop killing dogs. It's not
no more dogs.
That's not a tone I like.
I know, and lately, God, I've played so many games with dogs. It's a trend, I guess.
Where else have you seen dogs?
Well, Valiant Hearts had a
right.
dog.
Okay. Yeah. I finished that over the weekend too, and that's kind of where I was going with this point of, Wolfenstein's a game that I thought I was able to, when it decided to make a serious point or decided to get super serious, it somehow worked really well, especially because it was contrasted against all the hyperbolized action and craziness that was happening. And Valiant Hearts, achieves that in a very different way, in which it has sort of these animated, cartoonish graphics and a lot of humor that's occurring in the story. It's very light a lot of the time, but then when it chooses to get dark, it gets dark very, very quickly. And I think the reason it's able to achieve that, and then part of the reason Wolfenstein's able to achieve that, is because it can jump between multiple different tones, and so it gives you a sense of relief from the darkness or the awfulness, so that when it chooses to go back there, it's way more powerful, because you haven't just been rolling around in it the entire time.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and that is, hilariously, I almost feel like Wolfenstein does that a little bit better than Valiant Hearts does.
I would actually agree. I would definitely agree.
I mean, taking at face value, that sounds like a weird thing. I played Valiant Hearts. I reviewed it, and I really, really loved that game. And it, again, gut punches left and right, especially with the driest elements of the game, the elements of the game that sound on paper like they would be boring and very, very dry. There are just all these little facts that you sort of encounter, and they're optional, and it's almost like a little collection metagame. But there are things like how soldiers survived and who wrote whom from home, and all these little sort of tidbits about real life people that just, there were times where I was playing this game where I was moved almost to tears just reading these little historic facts that are just sort of littered around the levels in the game. And then it would go to, a puzzle that would be, maybe a little bit goofy, but still very much,
It was
It
thematically
still felt
appropriate,
appropriate. Yeah,
but sometimes it
exactly.
felt like the game went on a little too long, had a few too many puzzles. When it sometimes
Yeah,
felt like the puzzles were their way of filling the game with more
for
content
sure.
than the
Yeah,
story could justify. And certainly about 2/3 through, I was sort of going, okay, maybe we don't need this another puzzle in which I twist around the pipes so that the
right.
gas can go out or something like that. It felt like the game. I'm glad the game exists, and I think that the high notes that it hits are so high that it's absolutely worth playing, warts and
Yeah,
all. And
definitely.
one of the takeaways I saw from some folks that played it, and I certainly felt this way sometimes, was, well, is this a game that the story, it shouldn't be in a video game? Like, is it a story they wanted to tell and it just happens to be in a video game, as opposed
Sure.
to being in a video game because it should be in a video game? And I think both can be true. I
Yeah.
think that what I mean by that is that some games have to start figuring out ways to tell these stories. And although Valiant Hearts may, in terms of the gameplay that fills in between the story elements, may not be its strongest suit, it's at least starting to grapple with the problem and start to
Yeah,
think about
absolutely.
where are ways that we can do what games are good at, which, for example, like in Valiant Hearts, when you have, sequences where gas is being used, and so you're turning these pipes to try and get the gas out of the way. So like you can see what they're going for, even if they
Yeah.
don't quite nail it, and it sort of takes away from the drama. But at least they've taken the first step to trying to solve the problem.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciated that even when the puzzles were fairly simple and just sort of felt maybe at times like filter, they at least they made them thematically appropriate. You were almost always doing something a soldier would actually do or a medic would actually do, ostensibly. Even though it
Yeah,
was a quick time sequence or whatever, it was still like, okay, you would still be treating chlorine gas burns. Okay,
it's just not a rhythm game in real life,
yeah,
as far as I know.
exactly. And you probably weren't doing a whole lot of, I don't know, just shooting people up with syringes all the time. There was a lot of that.
Yeah,
Although I
see,
did like the part where you had to find, there's the part where you have to find a bone saw and actually amputate a limb as the medic character, and I was
yeah,
like,
that was
oh,
rough.
that's intense. I appreciated that they put that in. So yeah, good job.
Good job getting that limb amputation into the game. Not
Yeah,
enough of that.
yeah. Where's
Too
my
much dodge,
amputation
not
game?
enough limb amputation is basically what we're saying about video games right now.
Yeah, that's kind of the log line there for Valiant Hearts. I didn't cut off enough limbs, but
But
one was
yeah, I mean,
good.
you're absolutely right about the collectibles. I found that stuff to be extremely powerful, and it's one of those things that, like, if games are going to scratch sort of the addiction itch of like wanting to collect everything or to pick up shiny objects in an environment, at least in Valiant Hearts, you're learning these incredible little stories, tiny tidbits about a war that I feel like, at least for a lot of people my age, we don't know a lot about. I've
Yeah,
watched a lot of video games, glamorize and pull scenarios from World War II, but
sure.
World War One is like the prequel that games just didn't seem very interested in addressing for one reason or another. And I learned more about, maybe this just, is partially my fault for not doing my own research, but I learned more about World War One and tiny details, right? Like, I know the grand sort of arc of
Sure.
World War One, but for example, picking up an object in Valiant Hearts and learning that when gas warfare was first introduced and they weren't sure how to fight it and they didn't have gas masks distributed to everyone, they would just like pee on these rags and then put these urine-soaked rags over their mouth because it was the only way to reduce the burning without having proper equipment. It's like, oh God, like, I mean, like,
Yeah.
immediately that, like, yes, you're playing this sort of cartoonish game in Valiant Hearts, but it puts this weight on what you're seeing around you in a way that your imagination goes to some really, really dark places, and it's an effective use of you picking up a random object in the game that the game would probably have a hard time conveying in any other fashion.
Absolutely. That one really got me too. And there was another one that really sort of hit home, and it was in a scene where you're sort of on the home front, and you're in a burning building, and you find an object, and it's just a letter. And there was an entire corps of women apparently who wrote letters to soldiers who didn't have close families. They were too young, or for whatever reason they didn't have close family ties. So these people sort of took it upon themselves to make sure that there was like comfort coming from home, basically. And I just sort of like, I almost started crying just thinking about that, just thinking about like, oh my God, it's bad enough if you were there and in these trenches, and all this horrible things are happening, all your friends were dying, but you also didn't have family back home. So like somebody wrote you a letter that was just like, hey, how's it going? I don't know. It just felt very human, I guess, is the best sort of term for that. And it really kind of nailed me. And I was like, I guess I'll do this puzzle now game. Good.
Yeah, and that's, in some ways, that stuff worked, because it's like if the game was constantly about those moments wouldn't have as much of an impact, right?
Absolutely.
So that's where like the tonal shifts the game makes are really effective, even if they're sort of used as blunt instruments, right? Like,
Sure.
all right, here's a pipe puzzle right after you've learned about this really harrowing experience for a bunch of folks in World War I. But in concept, in theory, I really enjoy in quotes what they're attempting to do, which is to sort of, okay, like, right, you just got this gut punch, now let's shift away from that. You kind of forget about it. And then when they do choose to go back to something like that, it really means a lot, because often when you play, we play so many exaggerated action games, like, and it's part of the reason that I become just so tired of them is not even because they're not well made. It's just because they just hit the same note over and over again. It's like watching a Michael Bay film, or at least a modern Michael Bay film like Transformers, where it's just boom, boom, boom. So the only way to get any response out of you as a player is to just, the boom has to get bigger. It has to get more spectacular. It has to get more exaggerated. Whereas with tonal shifts, you don't have to compete with yourself over and over again. You can just allow the player to let their guard down, and then when you return to something else, it's going to hit because they weren't expecting it, or at least it's something different.
Yeah, it's a more complete experience. It feels like you're actually having an experience that's cohesive and means something, rather than just, okay, my senses are being bombarded and bombarded and bombarded. So, yeah, I definitely appreciate that. Especially as a reviewer, I play a lot of different kinds of games. So, whenever I get something that hits me like that and does tonal changes, to whatever degree, as long as they're trying, I feel like it means a lot, and I appreciate it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like Valiant Hearts, along with a game like Gone Home, like they're very sincere.
Yeah,
and I'm okay with games. I think Valiant Hearts is absolutely flawed in all sorts of ways, but man, it is sincere about what it tries to do. It like doesn't come across as tone deaf. It doesn't come across as trying to. I mean, obviously it's okay, manipulating your emotions. Everything's manipulating your emotions, but in the story they want to tell, there is sincerity there that you can appreciate. And when a game does try to do that, I feel like you can forgive it for a lot of problems, because you can see the ambition there, and I can respect that a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I would also much, much rather a developer try for something more emotionally resonant and maybe fail slightly. And again, I really, really enjoyed this game, and I think it does many things very well. But even if there are slight flaws or slight failings, I'd so much rather see developers really go for it and give it a shot, and than just not try at all.
So I'm curious, for you in particular, I get to just come on things like this and write stories without scores attached and sort of pontificate on these sorts of points. But when you have to play these games and then sit down and write a review of it and attach a score to it, like obviously it's not. How do you weigh all of those things? Like when we talk about this like specific point of, wow, I really respect the ambition of the game, but at the same time, they're asking for $15 from people and 6 hours of their time. That's certainly a consideration you're probably making in your review process. So how do you sort of weigh things like that when you actually have to sit down and write the review proper?
Sure. Well, writing reviews is really hard. It's still, probably the most fun job in the universe, so that's not a complaint. But you know, it definitely, for me, every single part of the experience weighs somewhat into the review, and I just try to go as far with my gut as I possibly can in terms of, did this feel right? Did this not feel right? And sort of weigh that against what it seems like the game is trying to be or trying to say. And a lot of that is guesswork for sure. I didn't and typically don't interview developers that I'm reviewing their game for because that would probably color my perception of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kind of have to guess. Like, they were Ubisoft Montreal, not Montreal, it was Ubisoft Montpellier, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, they were making this game and they were going for a tone that shifted. They were going for a very emotionally resonant story. They were going for, a very particular sort of set of emotions and experiences and a very wide range of emotions and experiences. And how well did they do? Did they hit those? I thought they did more often than they didn't, and I believe we gave it an 8 in my review. And at Polygon, we always discuss review scores. The writer doesn't just assign a score. We always kind of, we get into a conversation with Arthur, who's the reviews editor, and Phil, who's the deputy editor for reviews. And we always talk about it. We always talk it out. We sort of talk about weighing flaws versus weighing, strengths, and how much a flaw or a strength, really colored our experience and that sort of thing. So it ends up being a fairly organic process, and there's a lot of hand-wringing over scores and so on and so forth. But I like that process because it feels very honest. It feels like nothing kind of got over, we didn't leave any stones unturned in terms of like how to assess this game and how to feel very fair about a game and an experience we had. So.
Well, it seems like you definitely, in having that conversation, and we have similar ones. We don't have that as explicit a process at Giant Bomb, but we always send our reviews around for people to look at, and it's always useful when someone, reads a line that maybe you've thought about a lot, but then they ask you just like one little thing about it, and it sort of like pulls the pin out from under you, and you realize that you hadn't maybe fully thought out or articulated that argument, and that's really useful because just insulating yourself, it's good to do that, right? It's good to play the game by yourself, to write that review all by yourself, and to have that sort of insular personal process. But then you have to open it up because people are going to look at it and notice obvious flaws in your argument or maybe aspects that you miss that are really, really valuable to sort of convey that entire experience to someone.
Absolutely. And actually the Valiant Hearts review was the review that took me the longest to write, probably my entire career at Polygon. It was just very, very hard to sort of really articulate how I felt about this game in terms of, I love this experience, and I think this is wonderful and amazing. There are these flaws that are kind of bringing it down for me, but they're not completely bringing it down. So, it took a long time, honestly, to fully articulate how I felt about the game. But whenever a review is really, really difficult, I feel like that's what makes me a better reviewer. So I'm very happy for that experience, too.
Yeah, in the same way that you respect games that are trying to do something a little bit different and respect that ambition. When it's difficult as a reviewer to express why you like a game, I think that's really exciting. It's very frustrating in the beginning before you can kind of find the words to match what's going on in your heart and in your head. But then when you do manage to do that, it feels really good because I feel like other than giving people advice on how they spend their money, I feel like a good review helps articulate how someone feels about a game when they're not able to articulate that themselves. Where you read a line and they go, yes, that's exactly how I feel about the game. Like that makes me feel really good when it's like, okay, I have this really cushy, amazing job where I'm allowed to sit and think about games, and it's like if I can articulate what you want to say about a game because you weren't able to come up with the words, that makes me feel really good about what I do.
Yeah, that's always an intense and wonderful feeling, Yeah. It's like, yes, nailed it.
I had a bunch of intense, I don't know about wonderful, but definitely intense feelings this weekend trying to play Divinity Original Sin.
Oh, I've heard so many things.
Yeah, I've never played a game like this before, so I have no history with CRPGs, computer RPGs like Baldur's Gate, Planescape Torment, Icewind Dale, basically like the old, sort of lineage of early BioWare, I guess when they were called oh, the name is escaping me. Well, the chat and our site will yell at me and
Yeah,
correct me
I'm
on
sure
that
somebody
one.
will.
But I played shooters on the PC, and then I played JRPGs. So like all my RPG history comes from the archetypes of Japanese RPGs, like Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy, and Dragon
Sure.
Warrior, things like that. So like in those games, and even like modern games like Fallout 3, you can kind of futz your way through like leveling up and choosing how you want to create your characters. You can spend 10, 15 levels just kind of dumping points into
Sure.
whatever, and then 15 hours in, you can realize, oh right, this is actually what I need to be doing. And in Divinity: Original Sin, like those, the games where it's heavily inspired from, you just have to start the game over at that point. Like you can't. You're just like, oh, you fucked up. Like you put all your points in the wrong systems. Like you need to just start this thing from scratch, buddy. You might even have put the points in right, but you picked the wrong perks for the kind of characters you like to play. So it's really brutal in that way, but seems really satisfying theoretically. I haven't gotten
Sure.
there. I haven't gotten there yet, but theoretically, I see why this would be a really fascinating game. I mean, I played Shadowrun Returns last year, and I really enjoyed that. So I can definitely see how I would eventually enjoy Divinity: Original Sin, but I'm not quite there yet because it is absolutely terrifying. It's a game that scares the shit out of me. I feel like at every turn, every plus that I hit is a plus that I should have plussed somewhere else, and it freaks me out.
Yeah, man, games like that really, yeah, they intimidate the hell out of me. I'm always just like, yep, that could be 10 hours of my life. And I'm almost at the point in my life right now where 10 hours of my life, 20 hours of my life, that feels like an investment. Those are 10 or 20 hours that could have been spent asleep or, doing something enriching, and if I feel like my game experience is not enriching or it's not going somewhere, man, that feels like a loss of some kind, at this point. Maybe that's just because I'm old, but
Well, so part of it for me is so many people that I respect are talking about this game,
Sure.
and part of it is because they've played certain types of games that I haven't. So they play Divinity: Original Sin and go, gosh, oh, this reminds me of all the things I loved about a Baldur's Gate game, and I don't have that emotional or nostalgic touchstone. For me, I look at a bunch of stat screens and want to run away because I've gotten used to games just taking care of those stats for me. I level up and then the stats go up. Like I get it. I picked a ranger and then the stats just go up. I don't have to worry about this whole choosing legacy. Like I did not play D&D growing up. It's not something I've gotten into in adulthood. So I look at like 7 stat screens, and some people get a game boner, and I look at it and I just have to like run the fuck away. I don't know what's going on here. I don't like any of this. I need to get away as fast as possible. But I like the fact that I'm challenging myself, because when I've played games that scare me in the past, like Fire Emblem or XCOM, or I'm going to start playing Dynasty Warriors pretty soon. I don't know if I'll like that one, but so many people like those games. I want to know what exactly is going on there. But even if I don't like it, I want to have the experience, because I feel like, as you kind of articulated, as we get older, it's like super easy to keep playing the games and the genres that we know we really like, which is totally fine. Like that's absolutely, you should spend your money and your time where you feel, it is best spent. But I also feel like that impulse can also not allow us to have amazing experiences because we don't know what we're missing out on.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much value in stretching yourself a little bit, gaming-wise. I mean, in all ways in life, I suppose that's a pretty good, get outside your comfort zone and learn a thing. So.
And I just try and do that in games. Like it's like, okay, it would be really easy to just load up, like, Sniper Elite 3, which, whatever, I'm sure it's fine.
Sure.
But it's like, I know how a shooter works, right? Like I can get into that, play that for 10 hours, and I don't know how much I'll get out of it, even if it's good or bad. It's just sort of, it's a known quantity, whereas, Divinity: Original Sin, like, not a known quantity at all. So even if I end up hating it, at least, because this is what bothers me sometimes, is like the wholesale disregard for genres or franchises that you haven't tried. I'd rather at least be able to articulate,
Yeah,
this is why this thing sucks, or this is
absolutely.
why I hate this thing with a fiery passion, as opposed to just, well, it's for crazy people. I'd like to be able to say it's for crazy people and say why those people are crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of the old idea of you've got your comfort food and you've got your, sort of your time where you want to expand your palate, and it's good to balance those two.
Yeah,
Healthy gaming
exactly.
diets.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a well-rounded, healthy gaming diet. The although this doesn't work, but like I like vegetables now. But yeah, like games like these are like the vegetables of when you're a kid. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
you know it's probably good for you, but you don't want it. You don't want it. And
yeah.
then you grow up and you like vegetables. And you're like, oh, so like that's what Divinity Original Sin I hope is going to be for me. I have Kirk Hamilton of Kotaku is obsessed with this game, and he wrote up like a beginner's
Yeah,
guide.
I've been reading some of his coverage and how much he's into this game. And that's super interesting to me because, yeah, he's someone who we used to talk all the time about how our gaming preferences usually line up. So maybe I should try this too. Maybe I should get on board this Divinity bus.
Yeah, he wrote his beginner's guide that I'm following like a Bible. I have it bookmarked on my iPad, and I just have it
Nice.
open while I'm playing. Because he's sort of, he wrote this guide after getting a decent chunk into the game, and then basically wrote an article that was, here are the things I wish I knew about Divinity Original Sin when I started Divinity Original Sin. And so I just loaded that up, and I'm kind of following that to a T, which, I think for some people might be sacrilege because I'm not discovering the game on my own. But for me, it's the difference between being able to play it and feeling a little more comfortable and then not playing it at all because I'd get frustrated and overwhelmed. So it's like I'm following this guide. It's not playing the game for me, but it at least tells me, hey, like you should start the game with a ranger and a wizard, and because those are very complementary to the two party members you're going to find in the first couple hours of the game. And it's like, okay, it's slightly cheating, but I don't feel bad about it because it's the difference between me playing the game or not playing the game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just an aid. It's just a helper. It's not a
Exactly.
baby,
He's not
you
doing
know.
the combat for me.
That's
Although if
right.
Kirk wants to come over and do the combat for me, that's fine. If he wants to fly to Chicago, I'll watch him play Divinity instead. That's fine.
Yeah, that works too. If he likes it so much, right?
Exactly.
I'll
Yeah,
have
if
no
you like it so
problem with
much,
that.
Kirk, why don't you come over and play the game for me, all right? Just fly to Chicago, figure it out.
Yeah,
Kotaku's a big
exactly.
site. They should be able to justify a trip to
Clearly.
that. Exactly.
That and you get a drone, he gets a flight to Chicago. Everybody's
Exactly.
happy. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, man. Yeah, we're really figuring things out on this morning show. I'm
Seriously.
excited. Um,
Monday morning, ready for life, ready for the week.
as we wind down to the latter bits of the show, at least pick up a little bit of the news that happened
Yeah.
over the weekend. One of the ones that I found really interesting was that Adam Boyes, one of the Sony executives that the Giant Bomb community is intimately familiar with, because Adam Boyes has been around, maybe drunk, in our content for many years before he became someone very important at Sony. But he recently gave an interview to Gamasutra in which he was asked about the concept of early access coming to consoles. This is what he told Gamasutra. That's one of the massive conversations we have internally, that at what point does a game meet the standards of release? We still at some point ensure that we're being mindful of the consumer. We don't want somebody to stumble across that title, expect a full product, and have a negative experience. We're still figuring out what's okay. We obviously have our tech requirement checklist that people have to adhere to. So we're internally discussing what does that list look like? What are the caveats? Stuff like that. So it's a project that a lot of minds are considering. No details yet, but it's something at the top of my mind every day, which seems like Sony is basically saying, we want to do early access. We just need to figure out a way to do early access in a way that is consumer friendly, which I think sounds really exciting. I'm not sure how you fall on that side of the fence.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely all for it. And I've actually thought just a lot of stuff that I've seen recently from Steam, early access stuff. Like I remember playing Stomping Lands, and it just feels like there's so much fertile ground for games that are a little bit different, games that are a little weird. I mean, obviously not everything early access means it's going to be such an indie interesting, weird experience. But it just feels like there's a trend of that. And anything that gets more interesting games into more hands, I'm all for, basically.
Yeah, and I think what Adam Boyes is specifically alluding to this idea of wanting to make sure the player has the experience they are expecting, right? Like maybe not necessarily, you can't necessarily ensure every experience that a player has is going to be a good one, but if you can at least make sure that, when they purchase a game or they rent a game or whatever the case may be, that they're getting what they wanted at least in the early stages. And I think that's probably been the biggest issue with early access right now, was where a lot of folks I think were very excited in the early days of this, where of course the idea of being able to see into the middle of a game's development and be part of that process and make a meaningful impact on the final product is really exciting. But there have been enough instances where a developer has maybe taken advantage of that or been misleading or sort of tainted it for everyone else. And that's natural for, Valve is the first one out of the gate, trying to commercialize this idea of early access to game development and this participatory consumer experience. Whereas Sony, I think for the right reasons, wants to be a little more mindful of our players getting what they want when they choose to engage with that. So I think this actually could benefit everyone, because if anything, the one thing that Steam doesn't really have is, they don't, digital games in general don't have like a refund process or anything like that. But if Sony can come up with some solutions to some of these questions that make it so the consumer feels a little more empowered, it's not hard to imagine that stuff filtering down to Steam and other services, and ultimately that being sort of a good thing for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how they end up rolling that stuff out. I think early access has its place in consoles, but it's interesting because consoles are sort of, they I don't know, higher standards, but like he alludes to, checklists. There are more checklists to get on a console than there is to get published on Steam or just the PC in general. It's the Wild West for a reason, and it's part of the reason that makes PC gaming really exciting. But there is a more controlled, gated experience on consoles, and I'm definitely super curious to see where they sort of end up on that, because obviously it could definitely benefit everyone.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how they roll that out for sure.
Yeah, if some folks have some questions they want to drop in before we bring this to a close, feel free to do that, and I will check in the chat to bring some of those up. Tekken 7 was announced over the weekend. I don't know if I could care any less about that. No offense to the Tekken community. Fighting games not really my thing, and that's one where I've played it and I've just decided it's a time thing. Have you ever played fighting games at all?
I did when I was a little young. When I was in college, I got really into Soul Calibur, the Soul Calibur games. Super, super, super into the second and third Soul Calibur games, but never to a point where I could play them competitively. This was just competitive with my friends at my dorm, basically.
Sure.
And that's probably about as far as I'll ever go, I think. Again, like you're saying, it is such a time thing. I can't really dedicate that much time to any one game or any one genre even, which is, the blessing and the curse of being a reviewer. You get to sample everything, but you can't really, deep dive into any one thing, which I'm fine with. I did watch EVO this weekend. That was
did you?
Cool. Yeah. I watched all the Street Fighter stuff, which was fascinating, utterly, utterly fascinating.
What drew you to watching Street Fighter? Or was it more just, EVO's happening, I should probably tune in and see what this is all about?
I literally, I had a bunch of friends over from GaymerX, and we just watched EVO, because a bunch of folks were just huge fighting game fans. And they were like, oh, this is what's going on. So we were listening to the commentary, and then also sort of having meta commentary, like, in the group about what was going on, for people who didn't know quite as much about fighting games. It was very educational for me.
That's what's been interesting about, I've been tuning in off and on to the playoffs for the International, which is the upcoming Dota tournament. And part of the reason I really enjoyed it is because there's now this commentary stream that is directed explicitly at newcomers. So they're explaining all of the heroes, they're explaining what the abilities do, they're explaining the tactics. There's still a lot of lingo. You have to get over the hump that you have to get over with anything, games, sports, like any new thing. There's going to be lingo used that is just complete jargon to you for a while. Yeah. But the good thing about this this newbie stream is that they say that jargon, and then often if you pay attention long enough, they'll circle back around to explaining exactly sort of what that jargon is, what the context is for that term or strategy or character or ability, and I think that's like the huge problem. It's MOBAs and actually fighting games are, I think, similar in this respect, where everything happens so quickly that it's very difficult as an outside viewer that doesn't have the information to construe why people are freaking out, right? Like to me, it's just little animations happening, and he's beating up that other guy. That is certainly impressive that he's beating them up. But like if it's like an amazing counter or something like that, like that's not visible to me unless someone actually kind of points that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Weirdly, so I started boxing again 9 or so months ago, and I've been doing it really seriously. And hilariously, and I just find this kind of strange, but I've been much more attracted to fighting games. And just watching Evo, a couple nights ago, I was sort of like, obviously this is incredibly exaggerated. And I'm speaking about Street Fighter 4. This is obviously incredibly exaggerated. This is not realistic. But the way it feels to be in a fight, sort of in the ring, watching the other person's emotions, that sort of thing, the game kind of nails that, in a really interesting and fascinating way. Just the general flow and the way people move when they're fighting. And so I was really attracted to that, and I feel like I might actually potentially dive in a little bit to fighting games again. Obviously not on a competitive level, but just because I see the appeal again, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what makes fighting games special is that they're one-on-one, right? Like there's only
absolutely.
so much that can, as long as we're not talking about like Marvel vs. Capcom where there's like a bajillion things happening on the screen, and it's very pretty, but it just looks like nonsense a lot of the time. For a lot of fighting games, it is why they can be enjoyable even devoid of understanding the nuance, because, I get it. It's one guy or one girl fighting another guy or another girl, and that part I can understand. I can understand 1v1 beating the shit out of each other. Like that is communicated pretty quickly.
Exactly.
All right, let's see if I can pull up a question or two, and then we'll bring this to a close. Let's see. Everyone, I don't understand. I don't know the origin of this joke, but there must be something to this. Everyone keeps saying something about a New England accent.
Okay, yeah.
There's a lot of look at the thing closest to you and say it in a New England accent. I don't know what that means. I guess I must have missed that podcast.
I'm sitting on a chair. I got my door over here. I got my 4 pairs of shoes right here. My natural accent is actually a very, very thick New England accent. I'm from Rhode Island. Yes,
so you just stomped that out of your...
I did. On the last Idle Thumbs last week, this came up. Sean asked me, he's like, you really don't speak like you're from the Boston area. And I was like, what are you talking about? I do all the time. And seriously, it's sort of like people made fun of me in college, and I kind of felt really awkward about it, and so I started to try to stamp out my accent. And then, later in life, I've been kind of like, I should be proud of that. Whatever, you be proud of where you're from, that sort of thing. But I got so used to trying to speak without it that I almost have this it's almost like a Photoshop filter, in my brain that just sort of tries to filter out the most egregious of my accent. But yeah, I can slip into it at any time. It's, it happens.
That's a little bit, so my wife, when she was growing up, moved all around the country, and they moved around a lot, but they spent a lot of time when she was younger in Minnesota, and so
nice. Yeah.
She has this very particular Minnesotan accent, which is not all words,
sure,
but not all words.
Hashtag.
For if she, especially if she's had a glass of wine, just a little bit tipsy, house becomes house, and a bunch of other words slip into that. Yeah, she doesn't even notice it. I'll when we were dating early on, and I noticed this, we'd have a drink or two, and then all of a sudden she's like, oh, and then I just went and saw this house, and I'd be like, what? She goes, yeah, I went and saw the house. And I'm like, the what? And
The
then like the
best.
third time she go, oh, shut up. I've had a drink. I just
Yep, it's
I think it's really interesting how accents slip in and out as you get older.
yeah, it's really funny. It's for me, it's if I'm drinking, if I'm tired, if I'm angry, or I can just do it at will. It's easy for me to just slip back in. Or if I'm spending time in Rhode Island, I'm visiting my parents or whatever. It's all the way. I
Oh
can't even
yeah,
help it.
whenever we go to visit her family in Minnesota, it's just I just get ready for it. It's just like, all right, here we go. Like
Here
now
we
this accent's gonna kick in the entire. I'm gonna learn all the new words that I haven't heard her say before that she can say in that accent.
go.
And it's the thing about accents. Like you don't really notice you're doing it until someone points it out. Like people will be like, oh, you have a Chicago accent. I was like, I don't know what that means. I have no idea
Yeah.
what you're talking about, but it must be there, I guess.
Yeah, and accents are funny. I find them very charming, actually. I didn't always, but now in my life, I'm just like, oh, anything about where you're from, or anything about where what you have pride about is fascinating to me. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I need to dip into a thicker Chicago accent is what I'm thinking I should do. I should just now that I'm back
Go
here,
all the way Chicago.
yeah, I
All
just
the
really
way.
need to go hardcore Chicago. But Danielle, I've really appreciated you coming on our show. We'll
Yeah,
have
thank
to
you so
have
much.
you again soon. So you got you're working on a review of this Odyssey.
That's
When
right.
can when is the embargo up? When
I
can people
think the
check that out?
embargo is technically, I believe it's today, but
Okay.
I need to double check on that. But yeah, I oh, it's always weird with embargo. I'm sure you know this.
Yeah.
What you can say, what you can't say, and sort of like towing that line. So
Yeah.
yeah, but
It's a
if
game I played.
it is, yes, that is a game you've played, I'm sure,
Uh,
many, many times, every day. Well, thank you
uh,
so much for having me. This has been really, really fun. Yeah, thanks
Awesome.
again.
Well, we'll have to have you back again soon. And then where can people can also follow you on Twitter? What is your Twitter handle?
It's Danielle Ri, Danielleri. You can think of that as either Rhode Island or Riendeau, my last name. Whatever suits your fancy. That's what I tell people.
Awesome. Well, Danielle, thanks again for joining me. And then I don't know, maybe Alex will show up next time. We'll see. I'll be back again with another show on a Friday when hopefully I'll have played some more of Divinity Original Sin and can talk a little bit more about it. But that will do it for the Monday show, and then I'll see everyone on Friday. Bye.
All right. Thank you.